may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be now and ever acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Jesus didn't say, if you pray. He said, when you pray. He expected it to be part and parcel of our daily, weekly, monthly, yearly way of life. And so what I'm going to say today is not new or startling, and it's been said by lots of people many times before. But maybe just for a few moments it'll bring us back to when we started to pray, and maybe give us some fresh impetus for those who find it difficult. So, when you pray. It says in several of the Gospels, and more than once, something like this. Before daybreak next morning, Jesus went out to an isolated place to pray. In Luke it says, one day soon after, Jesus went up on a mountain to pray, and he prayed to God all night. None of the gospel writers write this as though it's something unusual or amazing. It doesn't say that Jesus did it every day, but I suspect that he did. That this was his way of beginning each day. Looks like sometimes it took a long time, an all-night prayer, as he talked to God about what he was doing and how he was going to plan his next day. Pray, then, regularly, is what I think this is teaching us. I can remember as a child, well, actually more of a teenager, otherwise I wouldn't have been awake, seeing my mum and dad kneeling by their bed. They knelt either side of their bed every night and prayed. They prayed a blessing on their family. They prayed for protection through the night. And they thanked God for all the wonderful things that had happened in the day. And maybe they weren't that wonderful, but all the everyday blessings that they knew were from God. And right up to the end of their lives, as Leslie and Jenny will tell you, every morning they prayed together and read the Bible together. It was part of the pattern of their lives. And I've tried to make it part of the pattern of my life too. That this is how I start my day. I have to say, I do find prayer in some situations difficult. I find it hard to pray for a whole hour at a time. I find my mind wandering if I'm not careful. I need to constantly keep myself on track. And I can't find the quote, but there was a Christian I heard quoted who said, I never pray for more than 15 minutes at a time, but I never go for more than 15 minutes without praying. In other words, it was so much part and parcel of his daily life to talk to God that he found himself talking to God in every situation. In the car, on the bus, at work, at lunch. He would find himself talking to God. And I wish I found it that easy. I wish I found it as easy to talk to God as I found it to talk to my dad. But I don't always. But pray regularly, I think, is the first key principle. When you pray, said Jesus, go away by yourself, shut the door behind you, and pray to your Father in private. I don't think this is Jesus saying that we should never pray together. I don't think that's what he's saying at all. What he's contrasting here is those religious leaders who would stand on street corners loudly proclaiming in complicated sentences and difficult Hebrew how wonderful they were and how wonderful God was to make them as wonderful as they were. Jesus is saying that's not what prayer's about. Prayer is about talking to God just like you talk to your dad or someone really close to you, if dad is not that bigger, where you would pour out your heart, pour out all that's going on in your life, and using the words you'd use every day. God doesn't care what words you use. He can see what you mean. He doesn't need an interpreter. So use the words that you'd use every day and talk to him about the things that matter to you, the things that are on your heart, your concerns, your worries, your anxieties, your joy, your thankfulness, all of it. When you pray, pray regularly. Keep it simple. Talk to him because he's your Father, and talk to him in the words you always use. And when you pray, keep on asking, and you'll receive what you ask for. Keep on seeking, and you will find. Keep on knocking, and the door will be opened. Be persistent. And this is where, of course, we have a difficulty. Because as we keep on seeking and asking and knocking, sometimes it doesn't look like what we're asking for we're going to get, what we're looking for we're going to find, or the door we're knocking on is going to be opened. And sometimes we have to live with that mystery. I'm sure there are people here who've been praying perhaps for a family member to come to Christ and it hasn't happened yet. And they've been praying perhaps for years and it still hasn't happened. Or maybe you've been praying for a healing to happen to someone and that hasn't happened either. And I don't know why some prayers are answered quickly, some prayers are answered slowly, but I know that all prayers are answered in eternity. I prayed for my mum and dad to be healed of their pain, and then eventually I prayed for them to find peace, which wasn't the same thing, and now I know they've got both. They are no longer in pain. They are at peace, but it took eternity to get there. Be persistent, because even if you don't see what you want or what you think you want, keep praying anyway, because in God's timing, all will be well. As Julian of Norwich said, all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. Father, said Jesus, if it's possible, let this cup of suffering be taken from me, yet I want your will to be done, not mine. And the last thing I would say is, in your prayer, in my prayer, be honest. Sorry to keep going back to mum and dad, but they're somebody that a lot of you knew, so I can use them as an example without having to explain too much. For the last 2 or 3 years of their life, they got quite cross with God. They did not know why they were still here. My dad couldn't see, he couldn't hear, he couldn't move about, he was in constant pain. My mum was fed up with having other people have to wash her and dress her and do her hair. And they kept saying to God, why won't you take us home? They were honest in what they wanted from God. They were honest in how they felt about things. They didn't blame him. They didn't think that he'd given them the pain or made them deaf. They just didn't understand why they were still here. And maybe there are things in your life that you don't understand at the moment. Issues that haven't been resolved, that you're wondering why. Why me? And if you want to say to God, why me, then say that. Be honest with him. He knows what you're thinking anyway. So open your heart and let him in. Jesus was in pain and agony of torment in anticipation of what was going to happen. And he earnestly prayed, so earnestly that it was as though drops of blood were pouring down his face. He earnestly prayed, let me not go through this yet. Not my will, but yours be done. We need to be honest about our pain. We need to be honest about our hurt. We need to take it to God and then put it down. If we put it down at the foot of the cross and then pick it back up again, what use is that? Take your pain and put it down. Let him carry it for you. Sometimes it's hard, isn't it? To lay down that kind of burden and leave it alone. When you pray, do it regularly. Make it part of the pattern of your day. Make bigger prayers perhaps the pattern of your month. Do it simply. Use the words that you always use as though you're talking to someone who loves and cares for you, because it's exactly what you're doing. Be honest. If you don't feel in a good place with God, he knows that already, but tell him and put it down and ask him to help. Be persistent. Our God is a patient God. He's got all the time in the world and all the time in eternity. And he will keep listening. And last of all, pray with expectation. Pray expecting that God is listening, because he is. Pray expecting that God hears the cry of your heart, because he does. And pray expecting that he will answer, because he will. We have and we worship and we serve and we love a faithful God who has promised to never leave us or forsake us, to be always there for us, to be standing by our side, to be the ground under our feet, to be the shelter over our head, to be the loving arms around us, and he listens. Pray with expectation, then leave it in his hands. And to him be all the glory. Amen.